We are often raised in a world that champions optimism, that encourages us to see the inherent goodness in everyone. It's a beautiful sentiment, this idea of giving the benefit of the doubt, of believing in second chances, and investing our hope in someone's untapped potential. There's a certain nobility in this outlook, a generosity of spirit. However, this very conditioning can become a dangerous blind spot, especially when we're dealing with individuals who have already, through their consistent actions, not their fleeting words, but their choices, their patterns, their often unspoken indifference, shown us precisely who they are. Yet, what do? We often ignore these blatant demonstrations. We engage in a kind of emotional alchemy, trying to spin the lead of their poor behavior into the gold of our imagined ideal. We seize upon the smallest glimmers of goodness, those rare moments of kindness or attention, and we magnify them, nurturing them with our hope, desperately wishing they'll blossom into the consistent character we crave. This is the fertile ground where unhealthy attachment takes root. The longer we allow ourselves to dismiss the reality they've laid bare, the deeper we sink into a bond founded not on truth, but on a fantasy we've co-created. Accepting what someone shows you, especially the first few times, requires immense discipline. It demands that you confront the uncomfortable, often painful truth head-on and possess the courage to say, this evidence is enough for me to walk away from what clearly isn't serving my well-being. But this isn't the common path. Most of us, unfortunately, wait for suffering to be our confirmation, for betrayals to repeat themselves until the disappointment becomes an undeniable, crushing weight. By then, we're so emotionally entangled, so deeply invested in the narrative we've woven, that the thought of detaching feels like amputating a part of our very soul. It's not necessarily the love for the actual person that makes leaving so hard. It's the shattering of the identity we constructed around them, the beautiful, intricate story we told ourselves about who they could be or who we could be with them. The truth is, we rarely fall in love with stark, unvarnished reality. More often, we fall head over heels for projections, our own and sometimes theirs. We become infatuated with a carefully curated version of a person that thrives more vividly in the fertile landscape of our imagination than it ever does in our day-to-day lived experience. This is precisely why the end of such a connection can inflict such profound, gut-wrenching pain. We're not just mourning the loss of the individual, we're grieving the intricate story we authored, the future we meticulously designed in the private chambers of our minds. When you've poured so much emotional capital into a fantasy, the eventual, unavoidable collision with truth feels like a brutal betrayal, even if that truth was subtly, or sometimes overtly, present from the very beginning. Think about it. You saw those red flags, didn't you? You felt that nagging gut instinct, that quiet, almost imperceptible discomfort during certain conversations, that slight, almost unconscious hesitation before you allowed yourself to trust them fully. You knew on some level, but knowing is merely awareness. It's a passive state. Accepting, on the other hand, is active. It's the decision to act on that awareness. Detachment, true emotional uncoupling, begins the very moment you stop trying to edit reality, the moment you cease your attempts to airbrush their flaws or rationalize their inconsistencies. It happens when you finally take off those rose-colored glasses and see them, not for the idealized version you so desperately wished they were, but for the person they consistently, demonstrably are. People, through their everyday actions and how they show up, or fail to, tell you everything you need to know. If their presence in your life is marked by inconsistency, neglect, or disrespect, understand that this isn't just a temporary phase, it's not merely stress. And it's certainly not just them going through something. This is very likely their baseline behavior, the core of what you can expect long term. Persisting in waiting for them to change is like diligently watering a dead plant. No matter how much effort, care, or hope you pour into it, the outcome will remain stubbornly, heartbreakingly the same. There's a stark, uncomfortable truth here that many find difficult to swallow. If someone consistently mistreats you, it is absolutely not your responsibility to make them a better person. It's not your sacred duty to somehow become lovable enough, patient enough, or understanding enough to awaken some dormant goodness within them. You are not a rehab center for the emotionally unavailable, the commitment phobic, or the perpetually wounded. You are not on this earth to audition for respect that should be freely and willingly given as a baseline for any healthy interaction. If someone cannot see your value, appreciate your presence, or treat you with fundamental decency without being constantly begged, cajoled, or reminded, then the simple, painful truth is they don't genuinely value you. And no, you are not going to be the magical exception that finally changes them. They are who they are, and they have repeatedly shown you. This realization is the precise moment true detachment must begin. This detachment isn't born from hatred or bitterness, though those feelings might be part of the initial emotional storm. Instead, it's a profound act of self-preservation, rooted in the understanding that your peace, your clarity, and indeed your entire future depend on your ability to see things as they truly are, not as you wish them to be. You cannot keep arguing with reality and ever expect to find freedom. You must surrender the fantasy, allow yourself to mourn what could have been, what you hoped for, and release the deeply ingrained idea that love means holding on relentlessly, no matter the personal cost. Sometimes, the most loving act for yourself, and paradoxically, sometimes even for the other person's potential growth, is to leave. Sometimes love is the wisdom to recognize when a dynamic is unhealthy, toxic, or simply unsustainable, and to walk away with your dignity and self-worth intact. People are not complex puzzles you are obligated to solve, and your value as a human being is certainly not defined by how much suffering or mistreatment you can endure. There is no grand prize at the end of a long, arduous journey of suffering in a relationship, only profound exhaustion, emotional depletion, and a spiritually drained existence. You deserve infinitely more than to be perpetually tired, simply because you stayed in a situation that consistently asked you to ignore your own fundamental needs and silence your own inner voice. That isn't love. That's a slow, painful process of self-abandonment. It's time to accept. It's time to believe them the first time they show you. It's time to stop waiting for a different, imaginary version of someone who has already clearly demonstrated their capabilities and limitations. This is how detachment truly begins, not in a blaze of anger, but in a quiet, resolute moment of clarity, in the stillness of knowing this is what it is. And that quiet, unshakable truth is more powerful than any excuse they could ever offer or any fantasy you could ever construct. Chapter 4. The Echo of Absence, when silence screams louder than words. It's an agonizing, almost paradoxical realization to arrive at. The understanding that your silence, your very absence, might begin to echo far more profoundly in someone's mind than your most passionate words or desperate pleas ever did. We often operate under the assumption that staying quiet, withholding our voice, or avoiding confrontation somehow preserves peace or shields us from further pain. But in many relational dynamics, particularly those marked by imbalance or disrespect, the opposite is true. Silence in the right context doesn't just speak, it screams. You have to grasp what unfolds when you cease your efforts, when you stop showing up, stop explaining yourself, stop justifying their actions, and crucially, stop chasing them for closure or understanding. This cessation of your energy fundamentally shifts the entire dynamic, especially with someone who, deep down, harbored a belief, conscious or not, that you would never truly walk away. People who are accustomed to being chased, to being the object of pursuit, often don't know how to react when the persistent footsteps behind them suddenly disappear. They pause, and for perhaps the first time, they are compelled to look over their shoulder and truly confront the void they helped create. That silence you now offer becomes a powerful mirror, reflecting back at them the very aspects of themselves and their behavior they've spent years avoiding. It's not the silence itself that begins to break them, but rather what rushes in to fill that quiet space. Their own thoughts, the ones they've diligently tried to ignore, the ones they previously drowned out with external attention, distractions, or the validation sought from others, perhaps even from you. Now, in your stark absence, these thoughts rise to the surface. The internal dialogue they never wanted to have begins. Why did they stop caring? Why didn't they try harder? Or why did my actions push them away? Was I wrong? And here's the crucial part. Those questions, those internal reckonings, have absolutely nothing to do with you anymore. They are her or his battles to wrestle with, her demons to confront. Because when you finally decisively go quiet, you gift her the uncomfortable, yet potentially transformative opportunity to hear herself, truly hear herself, perhaps for the very first time. And what she hears in that unadulterated internal space, it stings. Individuals who are addicted to control, who deftly manipulate affection, or who engage in power games within relationships are utterly unprepared for the impact of genuine silence. Why? Because silence effectively removes the battlefield. There's nothing left to fight against, no reaction to provoke, no attention to exploit or twist. It leaves them standing alone with the only opponent they can't outsmart, outmaneuver, or emotionally blackmail: themselves. And that is precisely when the carefully constructed ego, the one that thrived on your reactions and engagement, begins to fracture. The performance they've been putting on, perhaps for years, starts to crumble under the weight of your non-participation. Initially, she might try to project indifference. She might go out of her way to show the world and herself that your absence doesn't affect her. This is often just armor, a delaying tactic, a final desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of control and to convince herself that she still holds the power. But internally, a different story is unfolding. She knows. She feels the weight of what was lost, the value of what she perhaps took for granted. She senses the dissonance of your silence like a loose thread that, once pulled, begins to unravel the entire tapestry she built around herself. And the longer you maintain that dignified, resolute silence, the more that thread pulls, dismantling the facade piece by piece. Because here's an undeniable truth. There is nothing more quietly powerful, more subtly unsettling to a certain type of personality than a person who no longer feels the need to explain themselves, who walks away not in a storm of anger, but with a calm, settled clarity. That kind of silence isn't weakness. It's profound strength, it's admirable restraint, it's hard-won wisdom, and it lingers. It stays in her mind in ways that heated words or tearful pleas never could. You are no longer a presence she can manage, manipulate, or react to. You have become a void she cannot control. You don't need to retaliate to make a statement. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to endlessly try to prove your worth. All you need to do is walk away in peace and let the inexorable march of time do what it does best. It reveals. It reveals who truly valued the connection, who took it for granted, and who, despite being given countless reasons to leave, somehow expected you to stay forever. And when sufficient time passes and your silence remains unbroken, it creates an internal pressure that no ego, no matter how inflated, can withstand indefinitely. Chapter 6. The slow burn of realization. When absence becomes heavy. Eventually the realization will dawn on her, not all at once, like a sudden epiphany, but gradually, creeping in during the quiet hours, in those unguarded moments when no one else is around to offer distraction or validation. It will surface in the stillness where your presence, whether it brought comfort or conflict, used to be. That's when regret, a slow and insidious creeper, begins to take root. That's when the true weight of her decisions, her actions, her inactions begins to press down, and no amount of pride, no new source of external validation can entirely drown out the uncomfortable truth that starts to surface from the depths of her own conscience. You're not being cruel by maintaining your silence. You're being unequivocally clear. You're decisively letting go of a dynamic that was never balanced, never truly fair, and where your contributions were perhaps never fully seen or appreciated. In doing so, you are reclaiming something far more vital than her fleeting attention or begrudging respect. You are reclaiming your self-respect, your energy, and your peace. That is the potent message your silence carries. It's not "I hate you" or "I hope you suffer." It's a quiet, firm declaration. I finally, irrevocably choose me. And that is what often breaks her ego. Not your anger, not your pain, but your newfound unshakable peace. Because peace, genuine inner contentment, is the one thing she likely never thought you'd find without her. It's the one state she perhaps believed she could withhold, manipulate, or control through her presence or absence. And now here you are, still calm, unmoved by her potential attempts to re-engage or test your resolve. And her world, for the first time, might begin to shake, because the only voice left for her to truly contend with is her own. That silence, your silence, is what lingers, a testament to your strength and your commitment to your own well-being. Remember, not every battle is fought with raised voices and dramatic confrontations. Some of the most profound victories are won in absolute, dignified quiet. There's something remarkably unsettling, almost predictably so, that happens when someone suddenly realizes you're no longer available to them in the way they had carelessly taken for granted. You see, attention, especially your consistent, validating attention, can be highly addictive. When that steady supply is abruptly cut off, when your energy is decisively withdrawn without lengthy explanations or dramatic pronouncements, it creates a vacuum. And into that vacuum, the very person who once dismissed, ignored, or undervalued your presence often begins to desperately chase the mere echo of it. It's a fascinating, if sometimes painful, psychological dance. It's often not you, the individual they necessarily want back. It's not even always the specifics of the relationship they truly miss. More often, it's the feeling of being desired, the intoxicating sensation of being the center of someone else's emotional orbit. When that external source of validation disappears, a subtle panic begins to set in. This crumbling doesn't happen immediately. It's rarely a sudden collapse. Instead, it's a slow burn, a gradual realization creeping in like a shadow lengthening in the afternoon sun. At first, she'll likely pretend she doesn't care. She'll immerse herself in distractions, perhaps even ostentatiously throwing herself into the attention of others, trying to prove, mostly to herself, that you were never that important, that your absence is a minor inconvenience at best. But this act, this charade of indifference, rarely lasts, because deep down, a truth begins to stir. It was your consistent presence, your unwavering willingness to be there, your refusal to abandon her even when she tested your limits or pushed you away, that fed her sense of importance and validation. Now that you're silent, now that you're truly gone from her emotional landscape, the mirror you once held up to her is cracked, and the carefully constructed illusion of her own indispensability begins to fall apart. In the beginning, she might find temporary comfort in her ego, clinging to the belief that you'll inevitably come back, that your silence is just a temporary tactic, a game you're playing to get her attention. But with each passing day, each week that your silence remains steadfast and your absence palpable, that comforting illusion erodes. Because you're not chasing, you're not trying to correct her perception of events. You're not desperately trying to fix what was broken. And it's precisely that stillness, that complete lack of pursuit, that begins to speak with the loudest, most unnerving voice. It's not your angry words or tearful accusations she'll remember most vividly in the long run. It's the steady, unwavering energy you once invested, your emotional willingness to show up, to try, to be present even when things were difficult. That memory, contrasted sharply with your current resolute silence, becomes haunting. What this contrast reveals isn't a weakness on your part, but an incredible disciplined restraint. Your conscious decision to stop pouring your precious life force into a container that was clearly riddled with holes, incapable of holding or valuing what you offered. This level of clarity, this kind of decisive withdrawal is rare, and because it's rare, it leaves an indelible mark. You see, when she was with you, even if the relationship was fraught with conflict or emotional distance, she was never truly alone in a fundamental sense. There was an unspoken safety net. A part of her likely knew, or at least assumed, that you'd be there, that you'd eventually come back, that the connection, however flawed, would persist. Now that safety net is gone, and the fall begins, not necessarily a public dramatic tumble, but an internal emotional descent. And that's where the real breakdowns often happen, in the quiet, private spaces when no one else is around to witness or validate them. This isn't about wishing for her to fall apart. This isn't about revenge or retribution. It's about the inescapable reality of cause and effect. actions have consequences. When you've spent a significant amount of time being overlooked, undervalued, perhaps even consistently disrespected, choosing to walk away with your dignity is often the only sane and self-respecting option left. That choice doesn't make you cruel, it makes you conscious. Conscious of your own worth, conscious of the critical difference between genuine love and one-sided obligation, conscious of the fundamental truth that you cannot keep giving parts of yourself to someone who doesn't even recognize, let alone appreciate, what they're receiving. And here's the strange, almost counterintuitive twist. The more peace and centeredness you carry in your silence, the more profoundly it unsettles her. She likely expected anger, confrontation, a demand for closure, or pleas for reconciliation. Instead, you offered none of it. And that void, that absence of the expected reaction, forces her to face the mirror without your voice there to soften the reflection, to rationalize her behavior, or to absorb her projections. That's when it truly begins to eat at her. That's when the seeds of guilt, if she's capable of it, start to take root. Not because you actively guilted her, but because she begins to realize in the starkness of your absence, the role she played in the demise of the connection. There's nothing quite like watching someone, from a distance of course, finally begin to understand the true cost of losing something or someone they mistakenly believed they could always come back to. Not because you wanted them to suffer, but because, for their own growth and your own peace, they needed to wake up. And sometimes, the only alarm clock potent enough to rouse people from their complacency is the deafening sound of absence. Not punishment, not overt pain, just the complete, unwavering removal of your presence. That's where the real lessons often begin. That's when self-reflection becomes unavoidable. You didn't break her, you just stopped propping up her illusions. You stopped carrying the immense weight of her indecision, her ambivalence, her emotional unavailability. And in doing so, you gave her the uncomfortable but necessary opportunity to truly feel the absence, not just of your physical body, but of your energy, your effort, your care. And that kind of absence is heavy. It doesn't dissipate quickly. It lingers in the spaces where your laughter used to fill the air, in the unanswered texts that speak volumes, in the moments of silence that stretch on far longer than ever expected. That is what chips away at the ego. That is what can crack the carefully maintained mask. Let her sit in it. Not because you are heartless, but because that discomfort, that raw confrontation with consequences, is often where genuine transformation, if it's ever to occur for her, truly lives. Not in comfort, not in easy validation, but in the challenging crucible of self-awareness. There's a strange, almost magnetic power in choosing not to react, especially in situations where a reaction is not only expected, but practically solicited. Most people, particularly those with certain ego structures, are subtly or overtly addicted to validation, to eliciting a response from others, even if that response is one of anger, hurt, or frustration. When you consciously choose to remain silent, to completely withdraw your energy and attention, it becomes something entirely unexpected, something they don't know how to process. This forces the other person to confront not just the specifics of what they did, but the more profound question of who they are without your reflection, without your engagement in their drama. That internal confrontation, that jarring collision between their ego and the stark reality of your absence can be brutal for them, and yet it is profoundly honest. There's no manipulation in authentic silence. It's pure, unadulterated consequence. When someone breaks your heart or consistently disappoints you, and you choose not to retaliate with fiery rage, desperate emotional pleading, or attempts to win them back, you do something that most people are simply not prepared for. You expose their own potential emptiness. Because when someone expects you to beg, to plead, to chase, and you do absolutely none of it, you're not just removing yourself from the toxic equation, you're systematically dismantling their perceived power over you. That shift in dynamic is devastating to someone who relied heavily on your predictable reactions to feel significant, powerful, or in control. This is especially true if her ego was constructed upon the unshakable belief that you'd always be there, that no matter what she did, no matter how much she pushed you away or pulled you back in, You'd eventually respond. You'd come back. You'd remain emotionally available on her terms. Your silent withdrawal shatters that core illusion. This silence, your silence, isn't just an absence of noise. It speaks volumes. It calmly and clearly states, I have seen what you're capable of. I have experienced the impact of your choices, and I have decisively concluded that it's no longer worth my peace, my energy, or my self-respect. It's a language of profound clarity, an undeniable statement of self-regard. Because real strength isn't loud, brash, or performative. It doesn't need to be. The strongest people are often those who can walk away from a damaging situation without needing to create a dramatic scene or prove a point. They don't leave a trail of fire and destruction in their wake. They just leave. And the absence, the void they leave behind, often burns far more deeply and for far longer than any angry words ever could. You're not punishing her when you go silent. Let's be absolutely clear, that is not the mature or healthy intent. What you are doing is consciously choosing not to participate any longer in the narrative she has been writing. A narrative where you are perpetually reactive, consistently available, always just one emotional pull, one strategic text, one hint of vulnerability away from returning to the fold. But now, the script has changed. Now she's left alone with the last thing she ever truly expected, your genuine, unfeigned indifference. And nothing forces a person to question themselves, their actions, and their impact more profoundly than realizing that someone they once believed they could emotionally control is no longer playing the game, no longer even on the same field. It's remarkably easy for someone to play with your emotions when they know with a degree of certainty that you'll respond, that you'll try to fix things, that you'll bend just a little more, compromise just a little further to make it work. But when you stop bending, when your silence becomes the unwavering, unambiguous answer to her unspoken or spoken attempts to re-engage, that's when the real unraveling for her often begins. Because now there's no one left to blame. No external target for her frustration or confusion, just a mirror reflecting her own choices and their consequences. And the reflection in that mirror, devoid of your validating or challenging presence, can become unbearable for someone unaccustomed to deep self-reflection. You are not abandoning her in the sense of malicious neglect. You are strategically removing yourself from a dynamic that was fundamentally built on imbalance. For too long, perhaps, you gave and she took. You tried and she tested. And after enough cycles of that exhausting pattern, silence becomes not just an option, but a profound necessity. Not primarily to hurt her, but to finally, blessedly hear yourself again. It's about creating the space to listen to that quiet, persistent voice inside, the one that has likely been whispering for a long time. You deserve better than this. This is not what love, respect, or a healthy connection feels like. That inner voice doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It just waits, patiently, until the external noise subsides, until the emotional storm passes, and you finally realize what genuine peace, your own intrinsic peace, truly feels like. In that newfound peace, you'll begin to truly understand the immense cost of constantly chasing approval, of contorting yourself to fit into someone else's narrow expectations. You'll see, with startling clarity, how much of your precious energy, your time, your very essence, was spent trying to prove your worth to someone who was fundamentally incapable of seeing it, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge it. And that realization, though it may carry a pang of past pain, is incredibly liberating. Because once you've tasted that kind of freedom, the freedom from needing their validation, the freedom from the anxiety of their inconsistency, the freedom from the emotional roller coaster they orchestrated, you can never fully go back to your old way of being. You won't want to. Not even if she comes back, tail between her legs, apologizing, professing newfound realizations, shedding tears of regret. Because now, you know what it feels like to exist, to thrive, to be whole, entirely outside of her sphere of approval or disapproval. And you will not trade that hard-won sovereignty for anything, certainly not for a rerun of a pattern that already proved itself damaging. Her ego may indeed crack under the weight of this new reality. She may even scramble to reconstruct it, seeking new sources of attention, new distractions, weaving new stories that paint her as the victim or the misunderstood party. But deep down, in the quiet recesses of her memory, she'll remember. She'll remember the one who didn't react in the expected ways, the one who didn't fight an endless, unwinnable battle to be understood, the one who ultimately chose the quiet dignity of silence over the exhausting chaos of continued engagement. And that memory, the memory of your calm withdrawal and subsequent self-reclamation, will linger. Not because you intentionally caused her pain, but because you didn't respond to her provocations or her attempts to draw you back into the old dance. That is what she'll never truly forget. There is immense, understated strength in restraint, in walking away without a dramatic scene, in choosing yourself without needing to make it all her fault. That's not weakness, that's profound clarity. That's knowing that sometimes the most powerful, impactful thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. And in the end, it's your silence, your peaceful indifference, not your impassioned words, that will echo the longest in the chambers of her mind. You have to understand something absolutely fundamental. When you begin the arduous but deeply rewarding process of pulling yourself together after heartbreak, after being taken for granted, you inadvertently become dangerous to the person who once held that power over you. This isn't because you're plotting revenge or actively trying to inflict pain. It's about the undeniable, almost alchemical shift in power that occurs, the profound transformation in your very presence and energy. For the first time, perhaps ever in relation to them, you are no longer defined by what they did to you or by their absence. You cease to orbit their world, constantly seeking their validation or reacting to their whims. And when that happens, when the spotlight of your attention, which once pointed so intensely towards them, turns decisively inward towards your own healing and growth, it unsettles them in ways they never anticipated and are often ill-equipped to handle.